I'll be refuting Morgan's claim that passing the TARP program was a mistake. She states that first, it was not well thought out or debated. TARP didn't have enough guidelines, and 3, the TARP legislations included a lot of spending unrelated to troubled assets. My counterclaim is because of the evidence and reasoning she uses in her arguments, that the conclusion that the TARP bill was a mistake cannot be properly reached. In the advocate's first supporting claim, she states the TARP bill was proposed on the 29th of September, dismissed, and then returned again 2 days later, where it was debated until the 3rd of October, and when it was passed by Congress. She argues that those 3 days were not ample time to debate and discuss the bill. However, if 3 days is not enough time, then what is? If Congress was to debate for weeks on end for every bill that came their way, then it would become even slower than it already is. In addition, a large part of the advocate's argument seems to rely on articles by the journalist Declan McCullough, a news correspondent for CNET, for an authoritative view on the subject of TARP. She even goes as far to quote him when discussing her belief that the TARP bill was rushed through Congress and not given adequate amount of time. However, after researching his background, I have found that he does not have a degree in politics or a degree in law. He has no experience in the legislative system, and furthermore, he was not present at the time Congress passed the bill, so he cannot know whether or not the Congress had enough time to understand it. Therefore, his view has no backing in his claim. Furthermore, the advocate also attempts to make the connection that because revisions were being made on the TARP bill only 2 weeks later, it was not debated enough. There is fault in this because even though the revisions were necessary, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because time is short and a solution to this problem needed to be presented. Came up with the TARP bill, and a few weeks have gone, and the revisions mean that they've only got to fix and perfect the bill just like any other bill. The advocate begins her second claim by referring to a lengthy quote from an online article written again by Declan McCullough, in which he himself quoted from the auditor's report. However, he doesn't give any indication as to whom the auditor is or cite any evidence that he is actually quoting an auditor. In addition, my opponent attempts to use this quote as coming from the Government Accountability Office, but her works cited shows no proof for actually visiting a government website deemed a Government Accountability Office. In addition to relying on this ambiguous evidence, the advocate again uses Declan McCullough as a basis for most of her evidence in this supporting claim. As stated earlier, it's disproven. McCullough's view has no ground on this issue, thus her evidence in its entire supporting claim becomes invalid. And in the advocate's final supporting claim, she attacks the idea of pork barrel spending in the TARP bill. While I do not condone the act of pork barrel spending, she seems to make the conclusion that the TARP bill is one of the only bills in the world that have pork barrel spending in it, and that pork barrel spending is something of a rarity. However, pork barrel spending is actually a common practice among politicians in our government, and sometimes is necessary in order to have bills passed. Sadly enough, everyone's okay with this. To quote Ronald S. Martin, a nationally syndicated columnist and author of Speak, Brother, A Black Man's View of America, and that's how it works in Congress. Democrats love earmarks, Republicans love earmarks, liberals have no problem with them, and conservatives talk fiscal responsibility, but it's okay as long as those earmark checks come their way. To conclude, because I've disproven that the advocate's evidence and reasoning in that the TARP was not debated enough and didn't have enough guidelines, and disproved her attack on pork barrel spending, it cannot be reached that passing the TARP bill was a mistake.
All right, structural issues are fine. The signpost on the first point is pretty clear. The challenge about the time is, I think, a little bit weak. The notion that 3 days ought to be sufficient, or maybe it's not sufficient. What is sufficient? That's an okay question to ask, but in the context in which it's being discussed, I think that you ought to provide some criteria if you think that the 3 days might be sufficient. Then there's a big discussion of the source, and I'm not sure if McCullough is a reporter that's being cited here, and if McCullough is in fact a reporter, then qualifications are probably not relevant as long as he has a reputation for reporting information accurately. If he's drawing inferences, that's where I think maybe some question about the qualification would matter. And even then, the challenges on the qualifications are a little bit thin. They're okay, but I don't know that they automatically disqualify the information, even if it is opinion evidence. The revisions argument, well, that's basically the advocates arguing that that's a sign of how it was being rushed, and you're basically saying, well, it's a sign that they're actually paying attention to what's going on and they had to fix those things. Both of those inferences might be valid given the signs that are being used here. I don't get any explanation about why your interpretation is more correct than the advocate's interpretation, and so I think that you needed to do a little bit more there. The signpost on the second point, again, we're back to the challenge on the source. It sounds like the better argument is that we're getting secondary information here instead of primary information, but you provide no information to contrast on this point, and that, you know, I'm not sure that it does anything to advance a counterposition on the argument. On the third point, you minimize the importance of the pork barrel arguments to some degree, in essence suggesting that everybody does it, but that doesn't necessarily demonstrate that this was not a unique situation, or that there wasn't a substantial amount of pork included, or that the pork that was included was unique in this particular situation. And I think that the fact that the pork is included in this process, by the way, it's making me hungry, damn it. You know? But I thought that you had an interesting quote there. By the way, if we applied the same standard to your quote, I'm not exactly sure, you know, that you provided qualifications for Mr. Martin. All right, I thought the summary was very clear. I'm just not sure that your argument is entirely convincing. All right.